So recently we had a win that's in a vertical that's traditionally not as robust on the managed cloud services end, and that is the educational sector, because they get a lot of their services for free. But Kyle Srott, our partner experience manager out of the South Central, has helped to start cracking that code in the educational sector. We've got a great story here on a Trojan horse that we found into the educational sector. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Kyle. So Kyle, welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so actually first, a few webinar reminders. This webinar is being recorded. We are going to send out this recording within 24 hours. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can send a chat, which Ross has already done, or you can send us an email. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Kyle.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. So thank you for the intro, and thanks everybody for taking just a few minutes out of your day today to chat with us. As Brian mentioned, this is a case study win that we'll talk about in the education vertical, which traditionally has not been a great vertical for us, but we're starting to see some change. So we'll talk about what is driving that change, the solutions that we can sell into education, and then address any questions that you may have. So please feel free to chat the questions, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. So to dive in, common pain points that we've seen in education is that traditionally have small IT budgets. So it can be a hard place to get in and sell, because they're very limited on not only what they can spend, but how they can spend it. Oftentimes they're kind of handcuffed a little bit in needing to spend money in an OpEx or in a CapEx type model versus a recurring OpEx model that we all sell into. So traditionally budgets have made it a little tough. They're also dealing with pain points of being susceptible to security threats. Oftentimes they have aging hardware with small IT teams, and this leaves them open many times to security threats like ransomware specifically. And they're also targets because they traditionally have large amounts of personally identifiable information, or PII. Oftentimes that's information on students, on faculty and staff, a lot of different people who have their information out there. You'll see two articles referenced on the bottom of the page here, and this is speaking to the fact that we're seeing increased coordinated attacks on public entities, municipalities, counties, cities, education systems as well. Recently, on August 16th, there was a coordinated attack here in Texas on 22 small Texas towns. The interesting thing with this is that it wasn't the big cities like we'd think about, because generally those will be better protected. These were small towns with things like we mentioned, small IT budgets, small IT staffs, and aging hardware. Of the 22, only one was able to kind of overcome the ransomware attack as it was happening, and they did so by unplugging computers from the network. They did not have a good plan in place, but they kind of took a hands-on approach and were able to get away from the attack. All of the others had to rebuild, in some cases pay ransom, in some cases pay fines, and these things can cost thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars for these entities. So the thing that we've seen in the education space is that we cannot compete on price. As Brian mentioned earlier, education school systems are generally getting free or nearly free licensing and hardware from Microsoft, Google, Dell. If you've got kids in school, my kids have Google accounts where they do everything from create presentations to share documents with classmates to turning in presentations to teachers, and all of that is given to school systems for free or nearly free. So price has generally made education kind of off limits. With that being said, the area that we found where we can compete is with services. We call these initially here Footinthedoor services. So services that School systems are recognizing that they need. It's services that they're not getting for free from vendors like we mentioned, and they're needing them. So first, think disaster recovery, and another example maybe managed services for Office 365. So to speak about disaster recovery, again, schools are not getting this for free, but with the recent onset of attacks and the coordinated targeted attacks, they're seeing that they've got to have something in place to help them protect against some sort of attack or a natural disaster. They're also seeing that they're becoming targets due to the data-rich environments with the PII that they have in place. Another area where you as a trusted advisor can add value is around managed services for Office 365. So Microsoft, many of you probably know, provides nearly free cost for Office 365 licensing for nonprofits and education systems. We can now, through RapidScale, you can offer those discounted licenses with the added benefit of our support on top. So we can add everything from migration to ongoing support on top of that discounted licensing, so that your customer is taking advantage of the benefits of the Microsoft education license, but still having the value of a fully managed migration as well as management ongoing for their end users around O365. And I'll point out that disaster recovery and managed services, in our experience, have been land and expand type of services that get your foot in the door and allow you to then go talk about SD-WAN, voice over IP, network, other services that you have at your disposal to sell.
Yeah, so traditionally in the educational sector, cloud services have been somewhat of a commodity, right? Like 365 and G Suite or whatever they're using, it's free to them, right? What's changing now is that with the increased threats of security and how good hackers are getting and the embarrassment that they're causing all these superintendents, what's no longer that commodity is managing all of this, is managing that DR plan, having a less expensive plan. So you're seeing the threats of security are making management of a few of these services non-commoditized. So that's what we're seeing in the marketplace now.
Yeah, well said, Brian. I appreciate that addition, because you're exactly right. The technology is the commodity. Where we're adding value is the support and the people we put on top of that commodity. So tips for selling into the education vertical, again, something that's been traditionally off limits for us. Again, the number one thing is we have to stay away from the price conversation and focus on the areas where they're either short-staffed or underprepared. That's where you as a partner or us as a vendor can provide value around a comprehensive solution, like Brian mentioned. So removing the commodity priced technology platform and adding the value of a comprehensive solution with the support and the overall benefit that the school system is getting from the solution. The other thing that we've seen is that private schools generally have a little bit more flexibility in how they spend their money. So sometimes they're an easier prospect to approach initially, simply because they've got a little bit more say over how they can spend their money and a little bit more flexibility in their budgets. And the third thing I want to point out is that it's important to know your audience. Just like any sales opportunity that you're in, education can be the same, where we kind of see two different audiences. One being the superintendent, which is what we call the above the line buyer. Superintendent in the solution that we're talking about today, specifically was worried about keeping their name out of the headlines. And when a school system or an entity, a business or municipality gets hit with a ransomware attack and they've got data that's been breached, it's the superintendent or the executive that has their name in the headlines, and that is not good for anybody, and it gets them worried about their job. So we had to speak to the board as well as the superintendent here about how we were going to keep their school safe and out of the headlines. And then the below the line buyer, in this case, was the director of IT, who was a big proponent for us. He likes the technology that we're using and the way that we were supporting it. We became an extension. We were able to become an extension of his team, which is a thin team, a small team. And he was really worried about how are we going to protect the data. So you've got two different conversations. One, how's the solution helping the reputation of the organization at the superintendent level? And then two, how is the technology making the life of the IT director easier?
Right, and I'll just jump in here real quick, Kyle. For those on the call, in cloud services, when we say that a staff is short-staffed, generally speaking, what we found is that means less than 2% of their entire staff is IT. Right? So if they're a company of 100 employees, if they have a staff of 2, they're right on that line, right? If they have 1 or 2, they're probably understaffed. If they're a company of 200 people and they have an IT staff of 4, they're probably understaffed, right? And then you keep moving up. But that magic number is right at about 2%. So.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Brian. So for this customer specifically, we'll dive into the opportunity and the deal here. This customer is a traditional pre-K through 12th grade public school system in Tulsa, Oklahoma, founded in 1907, a large school district that really in Oklahoma is seen as the leader. Everything from their athletics to their facilities to their education programs. They really are seen as a thought leader and kind of the tip of the spear. Many school districts are looking to them for kind of thought leadership across the board. And so as you can see, they're your traditional school system. Again, really providing some thought leadership. The sales rep or the trusted advisor that we worked with on this solution had the school system as a customer. They're selling circuits into there and some connectivity and other things. So they had a relationship. The thing that I want to call out or point out is that they were able to get in and just open a conversation about disaster recovery and uncover the opportunity. The important thing here is that the school system had already been down the path of looking for a DR solution for 4 to 6 months. So they were already well down the path and did not know that disaster recovery as a service or rapid scale was a viable solution. And so the trusted advisor was able to get in there and talk about how disaster recovery as a solution was an actual option for them, and ultimately find a deal that otherwise would not have been a win for them. Otherwise, the school system would have gone with a more traditional disaster recovery solution and not even known that rapid scale or disaster recovery as a service was a solution. So kudos to the sales rep, the technology advisor was able to uncover that need. The compelling events were that many schools, as I've mentioned, were being hit with ransomware attacks. So there's a very real security concern. The other thing was that from a natural disaster standpoint, Oklahoma had experienced kind of record flooding, and the Arkansas River specifically had reached some record levels. And this particular school system was located near the banks of the Arkansas River. So as the Arkansas River continued to rise, there was some concern around their data center, the production data center that was not far from the banks of the Arkansas, and what would happen if the river came up all the way to their production data center. And the other thing is that they had experienced an actual shutdown of their backup generator due to some construction where wires were cut and power was cut off. And so they actually had a situation where they were having to rely on their previous non-robust disaster recovery solution in the event of an actual emergency. So as you can see, a lot of times when we talk DR, we're talking about natural disasters, but here there's multiple things at play with things like construction, security threats, or ransomware, and they did not have a good DR practice in place. They did not have a good plan prior to us coming in there. So again, previously their disaster recovery plan was replication on site. They were replicating to a SAN that was located at a different building on the same campus 300 yards away. So they did not have geographic redundancy. They were leveraging aging hardware. So they were having to replace their SAN that they were using for DR. That was going to be a large out-of-pocket expense. And they desired a solution that was geographically redundant, provided offsite disaster recovery for the production environment, and they needed to mitigate the risk of data loss with the PII that they had within their data. So as a result, we were able to come in and provide a solution that gave them the peace of mind of a 4-hour RTO, so recovery time objective of 4 hours, meaning that they, in the event of a disaster, they'd be back up and running within 4 hours, with a near real-time recovery point objective, meaning that they would lose maybe 15 minutes of data in the event that there was an attack or a disaster that they had to enact the disaster recovery plan. We provided high availability and redundant solution that provided them some geographic redundancy, which they did not have before. We were also able to provide a solution that was predictable from a cost standpoint. So giving them an OpEx solution that did not require them to purchase and maintain expensive SAN appliance that would have to then be replaced in a few years. Additionally, we became an extension of their IT team. So as I mentioned, they had a thin IT staff. Brian talked about the numbers there. They had a staff of a handful supporting the whole organization. Now they've got rapid scale that they can rely on. They can make a phone call. Our team will jump into action as needed. And in the event of disaster specific, we will enact their disaster recovery plan for them. So that's some peace of mind that we're able to provide. The other thing is we did look at, and this is common across almost all the disaster recovery solutions that we're selling today. We're able to look at the applications and data of an organization and provide full disaster recovery for those mission critical applications that need to be up and running within the 4-hour RTO. And then for the other data and applications that are maybe less mission critical, we can provide cloud backup that's also geographically redundant. So it's kind of a hybrid solution where the mission critical applications will be up and running within 4 hours. The other applications we have backed up securely, geographically redundant, but they may not have, it's a lower cost and they may not be brought up within that 4 hours, but they at least have the peace of mind that those things are secure and can be brought up in the event of a disaster as needed. So the economic impact of this opportunity was ultimately we won a $3,500 a month disaster recovery solution on a 36-month term. So total cost total contract value is about $126K over 3 years. For the customer, they were looking at a solution that would have been about an estimated $250K once they bought the appliances that they needed to, the new SAN appliances, as well as the personnel, the people, the time and materials needed to support that solution. And in addition to that, in the event of a disaster, it would have been on them to enact their disaster recovery plan and get things back up and running with a short staff. Now they've got a solution that costs them less over the term of the contract, and they've got the peace of mind of knowing that our team is backing that up, and our team can have it back up and running and then enact their disaster recovery plan when needed, as needed. So with that being said, what questions we have? Summer, I don't know if questions have come through on the chat that we can address. We'd love to dive deeper in any of the areas that people need.
Yep, we actually have multiple that came in. So first, are any of these services that we discussed today eligible for E-rate reimbursement?
So that's a great question, and that's an area where, one of the first slides we mentioned the price that education systems are getting on E-rate, and a lot of that has to do, in my experience, with the hardware. So we do not provide E-rate hardware-based solutions, which is one of those areas where when we're talking to education about things like infrastructure as a service or infrastructure solution for production environments, it's a tough conversation to have oftentimes because they're getting those E-rate prices from hardware vendors, which is where we really have to focus on the services that we provide for things like disaster recovery, management of O365, those types of things. So we do not offer E-rate backed services from a hardware standpoint, but again, we can provide Office 365 on the education pricing and add our support to that as well. So I hope that addresses that question.
Awesome. And then next, how does this service protect their dedicated internet access port / service? Does it replace their firewall or enhance it?
So if I understand that question correctly, this is a situation where they've still got a firewall on site, and we've got secure connections, obviously, that's handling the replication to our data center for the disaster recovery plan that's put in place. So they've still got that circuit on site there connecting to us securely. And then we've got, in the event of a disaster, we're failing over directly to our data center. And so their circuit, if their circuit goes down, they will not have connectivity to their on-site production data, but they won't need it at that point. They're connecting directly into our data center. So I hope that addresses that. If there's some additional clarification you can provide, I'm happy to.
Awesome, and we just keep having more. Who, aside from the partner, was there anyone else you worked with to get into the opportunity, and did you have to deal with any competition?
Yeah, so the competition on this was a hardware-based Unitrend solution backed by Dell and Lenovo, actually. So that was, as I mentioned, the customer was several months deep into looking at a solution that was hardware-based. And that was the competition in terms of kind of a service provider, a DR as a service provider. We were not competing with anybody on this one. And what was the other part? I think there was another part of that, Summer. Was that a two-part question?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Was there anyone else you worked with to get into the opportunity aside from the partner? I'm not sure if that's getting at something specific.
Yeah. So one thing that I will say there is that for our disaster recovery solutions, we're a large Zerto partner, and Zerto is the underlying platform that we leverage, and then we add our people and our support on top of Zerto to provide kind of the overall comprehensive solution. I mentioned that because a key part of us closing this deal, as well as a variety of other disaster recovery deals that we've closed recently, is the involvement of the Zerto team. So Zerto is kind of the industry leader when it comes to cloud-based replication, and again, we're close partners with them. So we actually did involve the Zerto team in helping us close this deal. They were able to do some demos for us and provide some additional kind of hands-on information, hands-on demo type stuff for this client to really help them get a comfort level with the technology, and then mixed with our support of that technology became a winning solution for us. And so in terms of other people that we involved, it was the team from Zerto that we worked closely with on all of these deals. And then again, competition was a hardware-based replication solution that was kind of it's very different. You're kind of comparing apples to oranges a little bit there. That hardware-based solution would have cost them a lot out of pocket from an OpEx or from a CapEx standpoint, and then they would have had to manage that and run it on their own internally.
Awesome. I'm just going to keep going until our time's up.
Perfect.
So to maintain connectivity, how do they connect to your DR?
So we've got a VPN-based secure connection to our data center. We've got a variety of solutions we're going to provide, including SD-wan and some other things that we can do to help support kind of a redundant connection. So again, we're not necessarily providing that connectivity. In this case, we are a Cox business now, and so our business partners Cox are helping with the connectivity side of things. But in these cases, we try to, help ensure that there's redundant connectivity into their organization, and then connect that back to our solution securely with a variety of options there. But it really gets into how much redundancy do they want, what does their budget allow for, and then working with you as the trusted advisor, the partner, to identify the right redundant connectivity into and out of their facility.
Awesome. And this is a really good question, but it has some context before it, so I'm just gonna read off the whole thing. I feel like a lot of municipalities that lack IT are typically those rural areas where change is very slow, and stepping into City Hall is like stepping into the 1970s. These are probably the likely targets of these targeted attacks, but the least likely to make a change. What have you found to be the best way to overcome that massive hurdle?
Yeah, that's a great question. The article that I referenced on maybe slide 2 or 3 is speaking directly to that. The counties, municipalities in Texas that were hit in August were all small counties, small towns. So I think the point there is absolutely accurate, that those are usually the ones that are dealing with aging hardware. They're kind of stuck in the time warp. And so where we've seen some benefit, or some kind of entryway into those, is that while their budgets are limited, DR as a service is grand scheme of things a low cost entry point into this account. So the way that we sell it, we're not charging for the compute that is needed up front. So we're charging essentially for the Zerto licensing and the storage needed to store that data. And so it gives the customer a good kind of quote unquote low cost entry point into disaster recovery. And so what we're seeing is that all these municipalities, and the same holds true for small and medium-sized businesses, I would say, that traditionally they're thinking, we're not a target. Why would people target us? We're not the big city. We're not the big organization. But because of that, that's exactly who hackers are targeting, we're seeing. And so you're kind of seeing these municipalities, like you're mentioning, older municipalities that are kind of waking up saying, we need some sort of protection. I mean, it's the same thing we're seeing with the school districts specifically, is that smaller school districts even now are saying we've got to have something in place because we're being targeted. And so you're seeing the mind shift there a little bit. And then we're able to provide a really predictable cost and low cost solution for them that gives them good technology and good support in creating a disaster recovery plan.
I'm going to just ask 2 more and then we'll wrap it up, okay?
Okay.
So what is the minimum customer size that Rapid Scale will get involved with?
So minimum, we don't really have a hard minimum. Most of our customers are, we say in the 40 to 4,000 user range. So usually an organization that's 40 to 50 users is on the small side, but I've got customers that are in the 15 to 20 user size. It just changes the cost structure a little bit, but there's really not a hard set minimum. We're happy to have a conversation around any opportunity or project you may have.
Awesome. And then who does the DR design? Is it Rapid Scale or Zerto or both?
A little bit of both. And I say both. Our engineers do the DR design. There's been obviously a lot of history of working with Zerto. So Zerto best practices and all that kind of stuff are taken into account. But when we're into an opportunity, our engineering team is doing the design based on Zerto best practices. And then again, we work closely with the Zerto team, so they are involved where and when needed.
And it's been a really awesome engagement from you guys. So if you do have more questions, feel free to reach out to us. I'll be sending out a follow-up email that you can respond directly to if you want to ask Kyle any more questions around this topic. But you're good to go, Kyle and Brian.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, feel free to email me, kyle.surratt@rapidscale.net. Would love to field any additional questions that maybe we didn't get to. Thank you for your time today.
All right, guys. Thank you.